All right. This is just to talk about a book that Michael and I wrote called Writing is Designing, Words in the User Experience. We wrote it in 2019 and it came out in 2020, just a couple months before everybody got stuck inside their houses for a long time. So we're going to go through the major points of kind of the thesis of our book and have any time for questions afterwards. So Michael, I'll let you introduce yourself if you want to.
Yeah, hey everybody. Thanks for having us again. I'm a content designer, co-author of this book, and also the founder of Leading Like You, which is an organization that talks about practical leadership and how to apply it in your everyday life. You can check more out about that at leadinglikeyou.com if you're interested.
Cool. And I am a content designer at Cruise. I just started, actually today is my first day. Previously was at Adobe for about 6 years, and both Michael and I use he, him pronouns. So we just kind of want to start off with, I think, a really simple and really powerful example of how important words are to a user experience. And it's something that is, it seems like it should be pretty obvious and straightforward, but people, I think, don't realize just how important just words are to this. So we like to take the example of taking an app screen. This one is from DoorDash, which is a pretty popular food delivery app at least in the US. And it's really easy to kind of see how important words are by just taking all the words away. And all of a sudden, like, this thing is not usable. You have like some sort of little branded welcome screen here. You have something that involves a list and maybe some stars. Arguably, those stars are content too. So like maybe we could have taken those away. And then there's something related to a map, but we just really have no idea kind of what's going on here without the words. Just a really kind of easy way to see how important language and information is to an app, to a user experience, and to a website, to anything where, users are trying to do something to accomplish their goals. So we really believe that just to figure out how to populate those kind of things with words, writing and designing need to team up in our brains together. And I'll get into what we mean by writing and design. But I think that there's somebody, who we both really respect named Nicole Fenton. She was one of the kind of like leaders of 18F, which is the United States Federal Digital Services. And she co-authored a book called Nicely Said with Kate Kiefer-Lee. And one of the quotes that, she said before is, "I work on digital products and physical goods, so I'm deeply involved in the design process. But I also want to call out early that my process is the design process. I don't write fiction or short stories. I use language to solve problems, whether that's behind the scenes or in the product itself. I use words as material." And that's kind of the basis for just everything that Michael and I teach in our workshops and in this book and when we do talks. Here's a really kind of good practical example of this. This is something that I get a lot. I'm working with a team and they are building something and there is a button in it. And they're like, "Hey, Andy, what does this button need to say? I need some words for this button." So, the writer side of my brain says, like, what are the right words for this button? Like, let's say it's completing a workflow. Is it done? Is it continue? Is it finish? Is it complete? I have to kind of figure that out. But the designer side of my brain has a bunch of other questions. What are the entry and exit points for this button? Like, how does somebody get to this button? And when you click it, what does it lead to? What action immediately follows pressing this button? What does it do? Right? Are we using the right messaging component here in general? Should it be a button? Should it be an inline link? Should it be a dialog box? Should it be a pop-up toast? Should it be something else? What's the inverse action? Can you undo this button? And what does that look like? If it's follow, is it unfollow, right? Something like that. How does it translate or localize? There's a bunch of action completion buttons, especially at Google, that just says "got it," right? Just like a confirmation button. And that doesn't translate or localize into a lot of other languages. And also, does it fit within our voice and tone strategy, right? Like as a brand, as a company, as an app, we try to say things in a specific way. Does this do that? So all of this to say is that we really have to see the context surrounding that button, right? We can't just kind of do this in isolation. So writing is about fitting words together, and designing is about solving problems for your users. And that's why we say that we design with words. There's a very classic example of the 5 layers of UX. Jesse James Garrett wrote a book called The Elements of User Experience. You all might be familiar with this. And it basically shows that like when you're building a user experience, you sort of like stack things on top of each other, right? Like you're figuring out the reason why you're creating something, the strategy, right? Like then you're scoping it. Then you're building the system. So that could involve the skeleton and the structure of something. And then you have the surface level thing, how it looks and feels and sounds. And I think that along the way, there are deliverables and outcomes for outputs for each of these things. And there are, visual design deliverables, and kind of every step along the way, content designers also have deliverables, right? Like we're all doing strategy together. Designers are thinking about how something will behave and look and feel. And we're thinking about how to plan and create and manage that content that's going to go in there. We're all thinking about timelines, deliverables, roadmaps, etc. Hopefully we're all doing this at the same time with just in the same space. While a visual designer is thinking about design system stuff, right? Component documentation, patterns, things like that. We're thinking about style guide stuff. So grammar and mechanics, like your style guide, right? Your content patterns, terminology that you're using. And then also, while visual designers are thinking about what, in my organizations, they always call it the screens, right? Like your Figma files, the components, the workflows. We're thinking about the UX writing, the microcopy, the buttons, dialogues, error messages, etc. So every step along the journey, we need to be just actively part of designing something, rather than often what happens is, people bring us in at the last minute at the surface level to just sort of fill holes full of words. So if words are such an important part of design, why do we often think of design in terms of visual tools, right? Like people think, should I be using Sketch or Figma or Adobe XD to do my thing? What about when you're designing an interface for just a purely voice interface, right? Like, do you need something visual for all those things? I've designed voice interfaces using a text document, right? Like you could use Figma or, Sketch or whatever. But, this is kind of purely a words and language driven interface. So there's a quote from my good friend, Michael Metts, which is really great. I once put this on a sticker. It's really great. Don't mistake making a deliverable with making a difference, right? Like, just your design files aren't the output, aren't the thing that's going to help users kind of solve their problems. So I'm going to turn over to Michael to talk a little bit about some of the 3 big principles that we follow.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So we want to give you just some examples to drive this home a bit. Ultimately, what we think is that when you're treating words as design material, as Nicole Fenton was saying, there are 3 big concepts to focus on. One is to be usable, next is to be useful, and the third is to be responsible. So let's look at these kind of one by one and see what the implications are. And I just want to mention these things aren't novel or new. We didn't invent the concept of usability, obviously, but we just want to give you some ideas about how it can relate to the writing that we do every day for product experiences. So if we go to the next slide, here's an example. This is actually from Andy's former team at Adobe, but they were looking at an onboarding experience for one of their apps. And they had all these tutorials that would appear. And there was a way to find more tutorials if you needed them. So initially, what was there in the app was this text that says, not finding what you're looking for, tap on the search icon next to your profile picture. But the team realized there was a far more usable way to go about that, right? With the magic of hyperlinks. You don't have to tell someone to go look for the search icon and go figure out where your profile picture is. You could just make search, the word, a link, and send people over there directly. So this is far more concise and far easier to use. It's just more usable. So ultimately, it's about figuring out if people can use the words you've written, because they use words just like they use a button, just like they use in any interaction you might have in software. So this is why testing is so important. One of our favorite examples is the gov.uk highlighter test that really help you understand how people are processing and understanding information that they read. But that's why we want to test the language we're using and not just the interfaces themselves. In fact, Sarah Richards, as you see here, actually Sarah Winters is her name now, the author of Content Design, points out that if the words you write for something aren't accessible to everyone, you made a design choice that prevents people from using that thing. So if you think of it, for example, of people who rely on alt text on images or video to understand what's going on, that's crucial. If you don't include that text, if you don't put thought and intention into it, you're intentionally excluding people from that experience. I think this is really important to think about. There are also usability implications when it comes to how we're writing and how we sound when we write. This is a really in-depth academic study by Dr. Melanie Polkowski, where she was looking into this topic, particularly for voice interfaces. Her background is in IVR and phone technical support systems. And what she was looking for was the 4 most important usability factors for people. She surveyed 821 people for this study and narrowed down the 4 most important things out of 76 possibilities. One of those things was customer service behavior. And the way she defined that was these were things that related to the friendliness and politeness of the system, its speaking pace, and its use of familiar terms. And if you think about it, that's the concept of voice or tone of voice that a lot of people think about a lot. Like, how should this product sound? What words should we use? Should we use words that are familiar and everyday, or should we use words that are complicated and hard to understand? This kind of gives you some scientific backing that those choices are really important and that they have an effect on the usability of the system. This is a quote that Dr. Polkowski gave us when we interviewed her for the book. She said, "Human communication is the most important gift we have, whether it's through speech or writing. I really do think that human beings are worth fighting for, especially as technology overtakes more and more of what it means to be human." And I think about this, especially as we have different systems that people are interacting with every day, to understand what's going on with their health, to understand how to plan for the future, to pay utilities and things like that. Technology is taking more and more of the role where you used to have a human interaction, and it's really important that we're thoughtful and intentional about this. Next, your writing should be useful. What does that mean? What's useful writing look like in the wild? Well, here's an example of what it doesn't look like. This is an example from a checkout screen for a resort company. It's actually, this one happened to me. I screenshot it and took it to use for this deck. But we were booking a family vacation, and you had these check boxes at the end. One is opting you into, it looks like, 2 things at once, and then giving you an option to not receive commercial information by clicking the link and heading off somewhere else. So I don't know where you're going. I don't know if I'm going to lose my place in checkout if I do that. And then I don't know why there's a second checkbox below it that asks if I do not want to receive advertisements. This is really interesting. Not sure how this happened. You could guess that they have probably some metrics they're trying to boost around people opting in to the loyalty program. I don't want to speculate too much, but what I will say is, like, this is an awful lot of cognitive load to give people. This is probably going to tank crucial business metrics like completing a flow and actually booking that room as people struggle to understand what it is they're actually agreeing to in this moment. So what we're not thinking about when we create an experience like this is what people actually want in this moment, or what is actually useful to them as they're completing this interaction and actually giving you money. On the next screen, we have something that's a more positive example. And I think there are a lot more great examples of this. Recently, one of my favorites is from the UK, actually. It's Monzo, a bank. They have some great terms of service as well. But this is from Pinterest. And what they did for their approach is they have their very technical legal language at the top, but then after each dense section, they have a simple plain language summary at the bottom to help you understand what it is. And That's super awesome because usually these things are so hard to understand that we just never read them and don't understand what we're agreeing to and what we're giving away by joining a service like this. So props to them, props to Monzo, props to other companies that are actually putting time and attention into that. That's useful. One thing I'll just say is that and I hope all of you here would agree with me, is that writers need to understand a product's purpose and the user's needs to create useful experiences. And the reason I say that is because sometimes it's hard to get involved in those conversations. Sometimes it's hard to be contributing in an active way in those moments as a writer. But I hope that some of these examples start to help all of us see that, that it's really important to push to be involved in those conversations and to get the answers you need, because otherwise you won't be able to write effectively. Here's a quote that kind of backs that up from someone who's been doing this a while. Katie Lauer is a designer and writer, actually from my home city, Chicago. And Katie says, I feel like I always need the full context of what I'm solving for, so it's best for my work when I'm able to be in an environment where I can get it. If you're joining a project at the very end and there's low tolerance for questions, it's a sign your role as a writer hasn't been well positioned or isn't well understood. So I don't know if you've ever been shut down when you start to ask questions about what you're writing and why it should be a certain way. But this is just to help you feel like hopefully a little bit less alone, and hopefully like there are others out there who understand that that can be a struggle sometimes, but that it's worthwhile, that it's an important part of our jobs. Last, let's talk about what it means to be responsible with your writing. So if we look at this, this is a feature on LinkedIn that many of you have probably seen. This is another example from my own life that I had, where I saw a friend had been laid off from their job. I used to work with them, and I wrote just to express support, express that I wanted to help them in any way. And I offered if they could reach out to me if they wanted any help. And the person wrote back and said that they appreciated it and they're just going to take some time to process and start looking for jobs. And check out the 3 suggestions LinkedIn gave me to respond. Number 1, good luck. Could work, kind of flippant, especially with the exclamation point. Sounds good is okay, but then congratulations doesn't make sense and could even be kind of hurtful in this situation if this person thought I actually wrote that word. So the thing is, I'm sure the person who wrote these automatic replies didn't anticipate it being used in a really hard emotional moment like this. But that's why we have to explore as writers, how is our work being used? What are the cases where this could appear? We have to understand things like the algorithms that power them and bring them into an interface like this. Next up, this is a screenshot from Fitbit. I think it's an old one, but it's really worth talking about. This is when Andy was signing up for his Fitbit account. They just kind of give you a really straightforward sex, male, female field. For a lot of people, this could be really easy to fill out, but think about the experience a trans woman might have in this moment. It wouldn't be straightforward. You wouldn't know why they're asking for this information, and you may not know what to select. And we actually interviewed an activist and UX designer named Ada Powers for the book. And she was commenting on this particular interaction. She said if they were thinking about inclusivity, they'd understand that some questions don't have easy answers. By explaining what they want to know and why, it not only helps people in the margins like me, but anyone who may not be easily categorized and gets them even better quality information to act on. It's a win-win for the user and for the company. And so things like this, they're worth slowing down for. Interactions like this, product teams may be pushing them out without really thinking about it. But if you're seeing it happen and you can step in and help the team slow down and process and think about how to be more responsible, it's really worth it. It's not just worth it for the people, it's actually worth it for the business that's trying to move fast, right, according to themselves. So it's really important to dive in moments like this. Here's a quote from Natalie Yee, who's a UX designer we interviewed for the book. She says, we know that words can really hurt people or help them in their personal lives. We could say really reassuring words to people and it has this huge impact. And we could say hurtful words. It can have a years long impact, but we don't really treat the words we write in interfaces that way. But I really think we should. I really think we should do that. This is a really compelling thought from Natalie. Like, why do we kind of treat the words we say to each other in such a different category? And we think about how they could be perceived. We don't really think about how that happens in software. Another thing to think about for interactions like this is how you can give context. So while we're all about being concise and writing as tight as possible, typically, this is a far better way to ask the same question. This is from a medical service in the United States, and it gives you a lot more information and context on why they're asking for it and helps you understand what you should put based on your situation. Yeah, so I mean, there are far healthier patterns to use than just simply asking a question like that and expecting users to be able to work with it. The last thing we want to leave you with before we wrap up and head into Q&A or discussion is just the concept of a news feed. And I think this is something we probably are most familiar with from Facebook, and we see a lot of ways. You know, that it's labeled newsfeed, and we kind of don't really think about what that label is or what it means for us. But someone who has been thinking about what that label means is Jorge Ranco, the author of Living in Information and a few other books. Jorge says news is the feedback mechanism of our society. We vote based on the things we learn in the news. So when we take a concept like that and we subvert it for commercial use, that's something that should give you pause. And when I was talking to Jorge, one of the things he was describing was how in a Facebook news feed, you could have things appearing right next to each other, treated as equally news. You know, one could be from like the New York Times, which is more than 100 years old and has a fact-checking staff and vetted journalists. And another could be from a website that was created yesterday, and they are both equally treated as news feed. You know, so that's just something that we should think about, right? Like, how are these labels affecting the perception that we're creating in the world of these products that we're building? What impact do they have on people who are thinking about it? So with all that said, we would love to just head over to some Q&A if any of you have questions.